Our Father and our God, we come today to say thank you for these men and women who are here as volunteers. Thank you for the President who has taken time to come and to see it for himself. Father, we ask for help. Father, we thank you.
So you're praying to the same God that could have stopped the hurricane, didn't, and now are asking him to do something about the event that he could have prevented. Before we go any further, I want to say that Hurricane Helene was absolutely devastating. It's a tragedy what's happened in North Carolina and all the states that were affected. There's billions of dollars of damage. Families are displaced, a lot of them separated, a lot of them dead because of the hurricane, and it's super tragic. And I hope all the families are able to get the resources they need in order to build their life back up again if they lost their home, their property, or loved ones. I hope they get the aid and the resources they need in order to get back on track in life, because this event really did shake up a lot of people's lives. And yet again, there's another hurricane on its way, Hurricane Milton, and it's going to affect a lot of people. Apparently, it's become a lot worse than scientists were predicting it to be, so hopefully people are able to get out of there in time and able to get the resources they need after the hurricane goes through. But now I want to talk about the common response that happens after all these natural disasters happen. Whether it's an earthquake, it's a hurricane, it's a tsunami, it's always the same kind of response afterwards, which is people praying that God helps the victims of those events.
Call us together as a church to remember those whose lives have been devastated by Hurricane Helene. For this very week, families are planning funerals, people have lost homes, and people are suffering. I want us to be a people that are not self-absorbed and selfish. Even if our personal lives have not been hit, we care enough to pray for the lives of those who have been devastated in our nation.
I understand that most of the time this is just something people say. It's just kind of I'm looking out for you, I'm thinking about you, you're in my thoughts, I hope you get better, I hope things get better for you, I hope you get the help you need. But a lot of people seem to be legitimately thinking that God is going to help these people somehow, and God is really going to do something. And those are the people that really do confuse me with their thought process, because what is going on here is they're talking about a God that had the power to stop the storm, didn't. He sat there and watched the hurricane go through, all these people get hurt, just let it happen, and then now we're praying for that same God that had the power to stop that storm to save humans that were affected by the storm. Instead of questioning God, instead of saying, why didn't you stop this? Why, you had the power and you sat by and you didn't stop this. We're praising him and telling him, please help the victims of what you could have stopped. It seems like there's a double standard with God where anything he does or doesn't do can just be excused, and we're not going to question him, we're just going to let it go. We're going to praise him afterwards too. So I'm going to say this in another way so it might be a little bit more understandable. Imagine if the president is sitting in the White House and he gets reports about this hurricane coming, so he has the option to choose and tell people, hey, we need to evacuate. He has the option to send resources to help people evacuate, send aid. But instead, he just sits there. He just sits there and watches the hurricane come through. People dying, people losing their homes, people losing their property, everyone, billions of dollars in damage, and he just sits there. Afterwards, with those victims walking around, injured, bones broken, family lost, are we going to go to the president and say, President, please help them? Please? No! We're going to go to the president, we're going to say, what were you doing? What were you doing? You sat by and did nothing. You sat by and did nothing. You had the authority to send out aid. You had the authority, you had the money to send out aid and help these people. And what were you doing? You sat by. You sat by in the Oval Office. But apparently when it comes to God, who is much more powerful than the president, who is literally the creator of the universe and could just make that hurricane disappear if he wanted to, immediately. Make the hurricane go away. No one affected. Everyone saved. He doesn't do it, and afterwards, instead of questioning why, instead of being angry, instead of demanding more from an omnipotent being, we sit down and say, please help the people that were affected. Help the people that were affected because of your inaction. Because you are responsible for not doing anything when you could have done something. Please help those same people that you didn't care enough about to stop the hurricane. And this is just the problem of evil that I'm talking about. It's been around forever. Why does a good God, who is all-powerful, omnibenevolent, allow these things to happen to humanity? Why is there so much evil? Why is there so much suffering? This has been a question for a long, long time, and a lot of people who believe in God have come up with something called theodicies. Theodicies are basically solutions to this problem, or answers to this problem, trying to explain why God would allow it, why there's presence of evil in a world where there might be a omnibenevolent being. So in this video, we're going to go through a couple theodicies and try to see in this situation where God is letting Hurricane Milton come through, Hurricane Helene come through and destroy everything. We're going to see if any of these theodicies actually answer a question or provide a solution to it as to why all-loving God would allow this. So let's get the most ridiculous theodicy out of the way, which is the punishment theodicy. It's basically saying that people in North Carolina, people in Florida that are about to get hit with the hurricane, just deserved it. They were sinners. They were sinners in that city. They were sinners in that state, and they deserve to get hit. That's their punishment. God is punishing them through the use of a hurricane, and that's just how it is. That's how God punishes people. So I'm pretty sure anyone who's not from the medieval dark ages is not going to use this in a modern discussion about the problem of evil, because that is the most inhumane, immoral, psychopathic theodicy to use in order to answer why thousands of people are dying. Thousands of innocent people are dying. Babies, children are losing their home. Babies and children are dying. And they're innocent, but they must be punished. It must be a punishment from God. That is just, it just is not good enough. And it's just immoral, and I don't see how an omnibenevolent being can go along with this theodicy if this is really true. If you genuinely believe this theodicy, please comment below. Let's discuss this, because I have no idea how you can support this theodicy in a modern age of talking about the problem of evil. So the next one is also a really common one. It's a little bit more fundamentalist type of view of a theodicy, which is the original sin theodicy. So the original sin theodicy is basically, we go all the way back to Adam and Eve, and they ate the apple, they committed the original sin, so now humanity is suffering because of their free will, because of their rebellion against God.
And always praying in tragedy, I do, and people who are far from God would be brought nigh to him, and that God would be exonerated from the false belief of those who blame him for evil and suffering. That we understand theologically that we suffer not because God is not good, but there are storms and there's death and there's brokenness because of the rebellion of human beings that created a Genesis 3 world, a fallen humanity.
So that's why there's so much suffering in the world. That's why there's innocent people suffering, is because of it's humanity's fault, basically. It's humanity's fault. It's Adam and Eve's fault that there's so much suffering in the world and there's innocent people dying, and God is just trying his best to deal with the situation that's been created because of Adam and Eve's rebellion. On the surface, this seems a lot better than the punishment theodicy, because it's hidden behind this veil of Adam and Eve doing it, so it's kind of Adam and Eve's responsibility that there's so much suffering. We can kind of blame it on Adam and Eve, they kind of rebelled, so it's their fault, it's not God's fault. He's trying to make the best of the situation. But this also doesn't work because of several issues. Firstly, I want to go into why God is actually responsible for Adam and Eve's sin and responsible for the rebellion, therefore responsible for all the suffering in the world. So let's think about the fact of whether or not Adam and Eve had the choice to rebel or not. So when we're thinking about God, we're thinking about an omniscient being, so he knows everything that will happen in the future, definitely, because otherwise there would be no prophecy. He can't make prophecy if he doesn't see into the future. So he knows everything that is going to happen in time, and he is all-powerful, so he created the whole world. So when God is creating this world, he has an infinite number of options available to him, in front of him, and he can choose from any of these worlds, and he can choose to create this kind of world. He sits down, looks at all the worlds, looks at all the possible worlds. There's a possible world where he could bring that into being, where everything is paradise and everything could stay the same. It could stay paradise, nobody would be suffering. He could create a world where suffering happens for a little bit and then humanity gets redeemed very quickly and everything goes back to being paradise. But what does God choose? God chooses to create the world where Adam and Eve sin. He knew that was going to happen. He knew that was in the timeline of this world that he would create, and he chose to create that world. So therefore, Adam and Eve had no choice as to whether or not they would rebel or not, because God chose this world out of the possibilities, out of all the infinite possibilities that he could have created. He chose to create the one where they do rebel. So they had no choice. He knew they were going to rebel. He chose to create this world. An analogy we could use for this is like an author with a story. So when an author is sitting down, they have a blank book. There's nothing on the book. They could write anything. They could write any story. They could do any world building. It could be Lord of the Rings, it could be Avatar, it could be any type of world building they want. They have an infinite possibility of the worlds that they want to create. So they sit down and they're thinking, okay, which world should I create? Should I create a story where everyone is happy and everyone is living well? Should I create a story where it's an apocalypse and a lot of people are dying? Oh, I know. I'm going to create the story where there's an individual where the world is a utopia, it's very nice, and then there's one individual who creates a bioweapon, and that bioweapon spreads all around the world, and now people are dying, and it's horrible. When the author was making the story, the character in that story that creates the bioweapon had no choice to not create the bioweapon, because that is what the author wanted. He chose to create the world where that character had to create that bioweapon in order for that timeline to move forward. So therefore, that author is responsible for all the suffering caused by that bioweapon, because he chose the world where that bioweapon would come into being. Out of all the infinite possibilities, he knew what would happen, and he chose to create that story where that bioweapon would kill millions of people. So it's the same case with God and Adam and Eve in this world, if it's really a true story, is God is responsible for all the suffering because he chose the possible world where Adam and Eve would eat the apple and create original sin, and all the suffering would come into the world. Because they were using the original sin theodicy to kind of put the blame on humanity and say, oh, it's Adam and Eve's fault. It doesn't work, because ultimately God is responsible for all of it. God chose to create the world where Adam and Eve would rebel, so he's responsible for it. And as Uncle Ben says,
remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
So the second issue I have with the original sin theodicy is that there were these hypothetically two people back in the day, millions of years ago or thousands of years ago, for those of you who don't believe in science, that were living, and they had a paradise, they had a Garden of Eden, and they chose to rebel, and because of this rebellion, the rest of humanity go through all this suffering because of their action. Now, who decided that the condition of this, that the punishment for this rebellion would be passed on to all of humanity? God decided. This is not out of God's hands. God's hands are not tied. God is omnipotent. He gets to choose what happens after they eat the apple. He could have as easily chose to just say, oh, it's okay, I forgive you. It's like, it's alright. But no, he chose to say, all right, you and your future generations forever, until I come back and fix something somehow, will be suffering. Now, how is that justice? How is that come from an all-just God? Because you have individuals who were living millions of years ago commit some act, and now people here, generations afterwards, who had no hand in the deal, who had no hand in the rebellion, who couldn't talk to Adam and Eve and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't eat this apple. Hey, I'm fine not eating that apple. They never had the chance, and they're getting punished for that now. I mean, just think about it. If your grandfather committed theft, do you get punished for that? The last issue I have with the original sin theodicy is that how could Adam and Eve even be held responsible for a choice that they didn't even know was wrong? So throughout the whole story, the fruit is called the knowledge of good and evil. So they don't know what wrongness is, they don't know what goodness is, they're just kind of in a middle ground, they don't know what these things mean. And they go and commit this act. How would they know it's wrong to commit that act? But you might say God commanded them to not do it. So they have no incentive to follow it, because they have no idea that not following commandments are wrong. They don't have the concept of wrong, so disobeying commandments is not wrong to them. It's just nothing. They don't know, there's no incentive to follow it if they don't know what wrongness is. And then the other part of what God tells them, that he says, if you eat it, you will die. That doesn't mean anything to them either, because they have no idea what death is. Death didn't exist in this paradise before, so they have no idea what death is. So how could death possibly be a justification and an incentive for them to alter their course of actions? The concept of death didn't even exist. It's like me saying, if you don't subscribe, you will... What does it even mean to Like, what is that? What even is that concept? You don't even know. That's the same for death and Adam and Eve. They didn't even know what death was. They didn't know what that was. So how would they incentivize them to not eat the apple in any way? The next theodicy we have is the free will theodicy, which is probably the most common one that people use. It kind of makes the most sense intuitively. You kind of just throw out this theodicy and you're kind of like, okay, that kind of makes sense, and you move on with your day. So this theodicy is basically that God allows humans to have free will, and that is why there is evil and suffering in the world, because some humans choose to commit evil and suffering, and that's why there's evil and suffering while God allows it. Because if the humans were getting controlled, it wouldn't be true goodness. It wouldn't be goodness out of their own volition. It wouldn't be goodness out of their own free will. So that's why God allows them to have their free will, and this results in some people committing bad actions, committing suffering upon others, and that's how it is. This theodicy is a really good one when you're talking about the Holocaust or wars or atrocities or murder or anything like that, where it's human actions on humans. There's human intention to hurt someone, and they go and hurt someone, and that's their free will. However, this does not work when you're talking about natural disasters, when you're talking about things that have no human intent behind them. Now, you could make the case that Hurricane Helene and Milton are getting caused by global warming, which is humans' fault, which is human activity that is causing these hurricanes, but I don't think a lot of people supporting theodicies would be supporting that idea. But anyways, you could make that case. That is actually a pretty good case to make, that actually Hurricane Milton and Helene are caused because of human free will, and that human free will is coming from burning fossil fuels, and it's causing the atmosphere to make these hurricanes a lot worse. But then we dig a little deeper and we think about, okay, what about all the natural disasters that happened before humans started producing fossil fuels? There's plenty of natural disasters that happen. Volcanoes exploding. Volcanoes and earthquakes have pretty much nothing to do with the atmosphere and human activity. Those happen on their own, and God could stop those, and that would not affect human free will in any way. Those don't have to happen in order for humans to have free will. A human could still choose to murder another human if a volcano didn't happen. So it's still not excusing all these other natural disasters that God could stop, and he just doesn't. Another issue with this theodicy is that the idea of heaven is very widespread in many religions, and heaven is supposed to be this place of no suffering, no loss, there's no despair, or there's no tears, and everything will be okay, and you still have free will there somehow. So you have this hypothetical world where there's free will, but then there's no suffering. So why is that not the condition right now? Because apparently if you need free will, there would have to be some necessary suffering happening. But apparently in heaven that's not the case. So I don't see how this theodicy makes sense anymore if there's another world where you can have free will and there's no suffering, because why not just create that? Now there might be a couple possible options that you can say for heaven. You say, yeah, when we go to heaven, God kind of alters our mind and we don't really want to commit evil, but we still have free will. That would not be free will anymore. That would just be you had your desires artificially changed. It's like you took a drug and it made you not want to commit evil anymore. That's not your free will anymore. That's just an altered version of your mind. So that doesn't really work. So I don't really know how you could have free will, have it not be altered, and have a different result than it does on Earth. The last solution we have here is not really a solution. It's just kind of a cop-out, which is called skeptical theism. Skeptical theism basically says, hey, we're not all-knowing. We're not all-knowledgeable. We don't know about what God is doing. God must have some good reason that he's doing what he's doing. There must be some good reason that God allowed Hurricane Helene to go through and kill a bunch of people. There must be some good reason for that. We just don't know. We're not all knowing. So we need to kind of humble ourselves, and we need to just trust in God. This argument is really a thought-stopping argument. It wants to make the person just stop thinking about it. Just don't question it. It's okay. Just trust. This is kind of a cop-out argument to not really answer the problem. Just kind of tell you to stop thinking about it. But, as you know, we're here to not stop thinking about it. So we're going to keep thinking about it. This solution just assumes that God is good and is willing to do what is best for people, which has not been demonstrated. This is just presupposed that God is good and God is willing to do what is good for people. So that's the first issue. And then the second big issue with this is, why can't God explain anything to us? An example that a lot of skeptical theists use in order to make this argument a little bit more understandable is like, you have a child and you're taking them to the doctor to get a vaccine, and they're getting a vaccine. There's a scary needle about to go into their arm, and they're crying and they're asking, why do I have to get stabbed with this needle? And they don't really understand. They don't understand why this vaccine is actually good for them. They don't understand why they have to go through this bit of pain in order for a better outcome to happen. But there is always the possibility that the parents, no matter how inept, no matter how incompetent, could still give a flawed kind of explanation to the child, give something to the child. What we get from God is radio silence. We don't even get a flawed explanation. We don't even get a minuscule of an explanation. We just get radio silence. The parent in that situation with the kid could at least try and explain it, and the kid might not totally understand, but at least the parent tried. At least you can give credit for the parent trying. I can't even give credit to God even trying. Now let's imagine this parent as being all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving, and there's pretty much no excuse left in order for us to not get an explanation. Because God would have the capability in order to put this complex topic in a way where we could understand it, because He is all-knowing. He would know a way in which to explain it to us in order that we would understand. Is this not what Jesus did? He was explaining theology in the Bible using parables, which is a kind of dubbed down version where we can understand it. Has He lost this ability to explain things in simple ways as soon as He went to heaven? He just gave up on giving parables to us. He gave up on making things simpler to understand and giving us an actual explanation. This excuse of, God can't really explain it to us, it just does not work, because God is omniscient. He knows everything. He would know the best way to teach us. God is the best teacher that could ever exist. He would know how to take down a complex topic into a more simple topic that we could understand because of His all-knowingness. So this idea of God just can't give us an explanation, we're too small, we're too flawed to understand God's logic, is just not enough, because that's kind of insulting to God. That's kind of saying, God, your omniscience is not enough. You don't know a way in which you can explain it to us lowly beings. You are not good enough at teaching us that you could explain it in a simple way that we could understand. So yeah, this kind of we don't know God's reasons and we should just trust in Him doesn't really work. It doesn't excuse the deaths of hundreds of people from Hurricane Milton and Helene, so doesn't really work. So what does this all mean? Hurricane Helene has caused $200 billion worth of damage going through all the states that it did, destroyed people's lives, killed many people, and we as humans, and most importantly as Americans, have to get together and help these people and try to help each other as fellow human beings, because nobody else will. As far as we've seen, there is no Messiah or God that is willing to come out of their cowardly hiding to help humanity. No supernatural deity has come out to help humanity in any way because we're too much of a hassle, apparently. We have this all-loving God that leaves millions of people's prayers unanswered while they're in agony and begging for help. And we just continue to praise and worship this God because religion has just been passed down throughout generations, and we're so afraid of what we might have left if we just stop, if we just question this God, if we ask, why are you not helping? Instead, we have to make up theodicies, aka excuses for God, to why He's not helping people. So what this brings me down to is whether or not a God exists or does not exist makes no difference to us, because apparently a God that does exist acts no way different than a God that does not exist. We humans are all we have. If there is a tragic event like Hurricane Helene and Milton, and if there's a horrible thing that happens to people, we have to help each other. There is not going to be a Messiah. There's not going to be a God that is going to help us. We are all we have. And I'd like to finish off from a quote from Matt Dillahunty. I'll live for me and other real people until some God gives me 5 minutes of their time. They deserve none of mine. If you'd like to help out the families that were affected by Hurricane Helene, there's a link in the description that you guys can donate to, or you can also spread awareness about the issues that people have because of Hurricane Helene, the damages that it's caused, and that would help much more than praying to a God that does not care about us. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you enjoyed, click the subscribe button and the like button, comment below your thoughts if you want to have a discussion on any of these ideas, and thank you so much for watching.